He won't answer whether there are members of his existing cabinet and caucus who've been implicated in foreign interference. He won't answer whether his staff has been briefed about that interference. He won't answer even whether his party received illegal money directly from the foreign dictatorship in Beijing.
The excessive partisanship we're seeing and this issue that is extremely serious and extremely important to Canadians is exactly why we have chosen to appoint an independent expert to make the determination on how we can best reassure Canadians and ensure that our government and our institutions are doing everything to protect our democracy.
He's blocking a public inquiry which would compel him to give answers. His members are blocking an investigation here at Parliament. He won't answer questions on the floor of the House of Commons. He's even got a bill that would allow him to censor the internet. It's almost as if he admires the basic Chinese communist dictatorship.
We're clearly seeing once again that the Leader of the Opposition is simply not serious in his approach in reassuring Canadians about institutions, about our democracy, about the integrity of our elections.
Okay, for more on this, the CBC's Karina Roman joins me now. So, Karina, the second straight day where Pierre Poilievre questioned the Prime Minister's loyalty to Canada. Walk us through what happened in question period.
Well, what you saw there was more towards the middle and end of question period. First of all, Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, did every question for his party throughout question period, which is not the usual course of business. So that just shows you how they wanted to elevate this topic. And it did dominate question period. Obviously, the other parties were asking questions about this as well. But it started off a much more measured, succinct questions. Please answer this yes or no. Not that he got his yes or no answers. But then it evolved into a much more heated debate in question period. Accusations that the Prime Minister is hiding things, continuous calls for a public inquiry, that the Prime Minister must have known because these briefings were for his eyes. So he must have known that there were these schemes going on. As I said, the questions became more and more heated, but sort of the answers. Towards the end, the Prime Minister was bringing up the dinner that some Conservative MPs had with far-right European politician Christine Anderson, which was a much more pointed answer than just quietly answering the questions as he did in the beginning. And he slammed Pierre Poilievre for those accusations of disloyalty, calling them despicable to question his loyalty to Canada versus, helping out a foreign state. So there was sort of an evolution of this question period from quiet measure to definitely not.
Okay, all of this comes on the back of new reporting from Global Television. Sam Cooper, the reporter who's been leading on this. And Poilievre really pressed the Prime Minister answer about what he knew and when, about money and whether it went to from China, whether it went to candidates. How did the Prime Minister respond on that?
Yeah, I mean, the question kept saying, how could you not know about this when you have these two reports in the Global story that were clearly meant for the Prime Minister's eyes, even if we don't know whether he saw them or what weight they were given when they were given to him, if they were given to him. Now, these stories are talking about these schemes of funneling money from China or from Chinese operatives to federal candidates. But the language in the reports is that this money was earmarked to do this kind of interference in the election. And when you listen to the Prime Minister in terms of his response, it's very much, we have no information about federal candidates receiving money from China. Those words are quite key there because there's a difference between money being earmarked and whether or not it was actually delivered or found its way to the target versus saying that they received it. So the response today was very much the same as before, but you really start to notice the difference in terms of the careful answers from the Prime Minister in terms of the narrow wording that he's been using. And so between that and the fact that you have these schemes in these reports that we haven't seen, because again, this is global news reporting, there's so many questions being raised that aren't actually answered in these reports. For example, David, one of the schemes supposedly used a provincial Ontario elected government official as a middle person in the disbursement of these funds. And so that calls into question what party we're talking about here. There's been a lot of assumptions because the opposition is so, strong in its belief that this interference was all about helping the Liberals. But if you're talking about the Ontario government and you're talking about the government, well, that's a Conservative government. So again, these stories, so many questions, and because of the careful answering that we're hearing in question period, we're really at this point not getting a lot of answers.
Okay, Karina, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Karina Roman live tonight in Ottawa. Okay, to dig into this, it is time now for the Power Panel. Amanda Alvaro is a political commentator. Zane Velji is a campaign strategist and a partner at North Weather. Tim Powers is a chair of Summa Strategies, and Stephanie Levitz is a reporter here in Ottawa for the Toronto Star. Gang, this was a weird one today. Zane, I'd like to start with you. I don't know if you saw the scrum the Prime Minister had this morning. That was one of the more aggressive and difficult scrums I've ever seen for Justin Trudeau. Yeah. And then we had this question period that started off kind of surgical and prosecutorial and then descended to allegations about loyalty. How do you think the Prime Minister is handling this today?
Well, there's only two lessons in life, David. The first one is if it bleeds, it leads. And if the second one is if it's late, it better be great. And with the Prime Minister spending 2 weeks dragging his heels, it doesn't surprise me he's now entered into a contentious question period. He's in contentious scrums. And there's one line from that scrum, I'm going to paraphrase, where the Prime Minister ultimately said, listen, I know there's a cohort of Canadians that will say, regardless of what I say, what solutions I put on the table, they'll continue to have questions. And I hope the Prime Minister isn't too prescient, because those are like famous phrases of how governments fall, of how prime ministers fall, of when you can't get off the story, even when you spend undue, perhaps even unlimited political capital to get off a story. And I think that is what the Prime Minister's telegraphed here, fortunately or unfortunately for him, because there is very little chance that we're going to be off this story, quote unquote, in any meaningful way. And so when you look at his performance, this may have been the right instrument, the rapporteur. I would have called it something else, but it might be the right instrument. But the fact is, this is 2 weeks late, and it is short of what it needed to be in order to be effective, and more importantly for him, to get off the story.
Tim, it was a startling admission for the Prime Minister, I thought, to say, no matter what I say, there are Canadians out there who are going to have questions. And that's a challenging position to find yourself in politically.
Well, first, there's a third lesson. If you wear denim like Zane does on Power and Politics, you rock the show.
He's the Bruce Springsteen.
Way to go, buddy.
I'm in it for you, Tim.
I love it. I love it. To the serious nature of your question, that was a surprising answer, and he was getting tough questions from Steph's colleague, our friend Tonda McCharles. He wouldn't answer them, and his answer seems to be, I'm in a tough spot, give me a little bit of latitude. I don't know if that's going to work. I mean, question period was fascinating from a couple of perspectives. You do see Poilievre morphing into kind of a Tom Mulcair character, except for the latter little bit of flightiness that he didn't need to inject. But you also see the Prime Minister trying to grasp at anything he can to turn this around. And, the Christine Anderson story would be a great story in any other environment. But the problem is, the Conservatives aren't the enemy to the Prime Minister now. It's those who continue to leak. When we sat here last week, David, we said this story will continue to be a story if there are more documents. And the Prime Minister the Prime Minister is yet to provide a compelling answer as to how he didn't know about the documents Sam Cooper had access to today. And until he can, or point to how he wouldn't have seen them, this is going to be a real story. And he can try all the diversionary tactics he wants, and Poilievre does have to be careful here, but this is not going to go away from him.
So, Amanda, can you translate Justin Trudeau's denial into English for me? Because as I understand it, his comment going back to when he was asked about this in Tunisia on November 20th is that the government has no knowledge of money going directly from China to candidates, the 11 candidates who allegedly received help. That is how I understand his denial to me. It is not a denial of money going through intermediaries to candidates. Now, I know the need to be very precise in the language, but is that a distinction without a difference in some ways? You're either aware of Chinese money going to people in elections or you're not. It doesn't matter if there's an extra step along the way, does it?
Well, I'm not going to try to translate the Prime Minister, but I will say both he and the National Security Advisor, Jody Thomas, have said when they looked into it, and I quote, they told committee in December that she saw no evidence that any candidates in the 2019 federal election were influenced by money from the Chinese government. And then she said specifically, we have not seen money go to 11 candidates, period. So pretty clear from that perspective. And I think he was pretty clear today. I also think that the scrum, which I also watched, and the comment that he made about how, yeah, there are things that he'll say that, you know, some Canadians won't buy into, but the rest of the response was around. And so that is why I have put into place a special rapporteur to look into this, to have access to all of the documents, to dig into who knew what and when, and not just him, but also tasked NSI COP, also tasked the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency to look into what all agencies knew at any time, any allegations of interference at any time. So he's been very, very clear on this point that, and you know what, on any other occasion, and perhaps maybe because 2 weeks have passed, to put all of those mechanisms into place, the experts, the agencies, to have access to all of the top secret documents should be enough. And I think where things went really wrong today in question period was that we now have the leader of the opposition accusing the Prime Minister of Canada that he's not loyal to Canada, that he's actually working against Canadians, playing a dangerous, reckless, irresponsible political game with how Canadians trust not only the system, but the parliamentarians who are there to serve them.
Right.
And that I thought was crossing some serious lines.
Okay, we've seen that 2 days in a row from Mr. Poilievre, Stephanie. Also, we saw today a planted question from a Liberal backbencher inviting the Prime Minister to weigh in on abortion, which is always an interesting slam the abortion button when things are going bad for you politically. But, you know, the denials of Jody Thomas and the Prime Minister seem specific to me. I don't know if they've categorically denied awareness of what is in. This is a Privy Council office report that they're now quoting. And also, apparently, it means that there's someone in Queen's Park who is actively ferrying around money for the Chinese government. I mean, has this today undone everything the government tried to do on Monday night?
I mean, it certainly just puts more questions to the Prime Minister, right? I mean, to Tim's point, the things that he's being pressed upon and the things that he is refusing to answer, he often uses the language national security. It's very complicated, national security. You know what? No one's actually asking you to divulge national security. We're asking, hey, did you see that briefing note? Did you? Because it looks like it should have gone to your desk. And if it didn't go to your desk, why didn't it go to your desk? These are the questions we're asking about how the Prime Minister chooses to govern the country, what he does with the information he's given, how he makes decisions about it. And it seems, based on the reporting, that there are document after document stamped for your eyes only, Prime Minister, and it doesn't seem like either he's laid his eyes on them or he hasn't. Why or why not? These aren't difficult questions to answer.
Yeah, now, Zane, they have conceded they read the NSI COP report, which was leaked now in 2019, saying China was targeting people. They have not said anything definitively on this January 2022 document. Not making excuses for the government, but just laying out some context. January of last year was a busy time. A convoy rolled into Ottawa and took over the downtown, and Vladimir Putin started to make plans to invade Ukraine. So it is quite possible they were focused on other issues. But Zane, like the inability to just answer clear questions, did you read this? Did you know this? And even today, were you briefed about one of your candidates and someone in your caucus potentially being influenced by China? No answer. It's gone past the point where this becomes tenable, I think.
Well, and you've kind of made a great point there, David, around how tenable this is, because if we're going down Watergate memory lane, right, what did the Prime Minister know? When did he know it? And then I'd add a third one to Canadianize it. What actions did he take? Because the Liberals have a big-scale narrative problem here. It's not the narrative of symbolism or their issues with China. The narrative problem I think they actually face here, that this neatly fits into, is that they don't think the rules are for them, that they're the good guys on the team, that they're a good guys, they're the virtuous team on the field, and the rules don't need to apply. So the questions to me are not even about what if the Prime Minister read it or not, or did he dismiss it because it was A, not big enough of a deal for you and your analysis, and B, was it just helping your team in a marginal way and it wasn't significant enough that you could dismiss it? To me, that, while it might seem small, is the smoking gun, because it's about that sort of rules don't necessarily apply to us. And we've seen many proof points of that across the board. So in some way, shape, or form, we're going to see this come out. And the problem that Justin Trudeau faces in the short term is that Amanda listed out all the inquiries and investigations. Justin Trudeau's getting credit for none of them because he did the one that people were asking 2 weeks late. So even though he was setting up all these, nuanced investigations on all the multiple streams that we need to investigate, he gets zero political credit because the one thing everyone was calling for, he was 2 weeks late on. And I think that right now is catching a government flat-footed in the short term with significant ramifications on the long term when you ask the question, what actions did you take or why did you not take those actions?
Tim, Marco Mendicino told me on the show it's going to be a couple of weeks. It would be weeks before the special rapporteur is appointed. And then who knows how long before they make a decision or a recommendation on the inquiry. I don't know if they can wait that long, can they? I mean, how quickly do they need to have the person in place?
I know you don't like countdown clocks, but you should have you should have a tracker on the stream of weekly CSIS leaks, because it doesn't seem that they're abating. And if they're not abating, the rapporteur answer, which could be a good one, I don't disqualify that, is not going to hold water for a long period of time. I want to go back to something Amanda said, though, about Pierre Poilievre and the question. Well, I agree that the question was old school Poilievre and a little too over the top. I'd be careful about using that, and Amanda wasn't, but I don't think the government should use that as a way out either, because I do think there are a body of Canadians who look at this, who look at the saga and wonder why, for whatever reason, Trudeau didn't see the memo, didn't read the memo, read the memo, didn't use it. It lends itself to a sense that he's not being serious enough on this issue. And I think that has always been a vulnerability for him. If you go back in polls to when he became leader, people have always thought the areas where he is weak are on security and safety issues. Yeah. So it's not unfair to ask why you didn't pay the attention you should, and why will the Prime Minister's kind of caught. Last point I'll make on that Sam Cooper story and the questions Tonda was asking today, because if he says he didn't see them, then people will describe that as being not acceptable, incompetent, and if he did see them, then he's in trouble as well. So it's a tough place for him, not that I empathize, but they have to be careful thinking can just deflect this all to Poilievre's over the top.
So, Amanda, if he's not getting credit for what he's done and people are still waiting to see what he will do, how does the Prime Minister navigate this and try to put a more stable foundation under his feet on this particular one?
Yeah, and just a response, though, to what Tim just said, I mean, if Poilievre had just asked the questions that he was asking at the beginning of question period, that's one thing. But to suggest, or not even suggest, overtly accuse the Prime Minister of working against the interests of his own country, that's very different than asking what he knew or didn't know. That's where he went over the top. That's where he crossed a line. I also think that we can all say, well, it's too little, too late, or he's between a rock and a hard place because he looks like he's hiding something, but he's put a special rapporteur in place who has access to all of the documents.
Well, not yet. He's promised it. He's promised it. It hasn't happened
He's promised it.
Yeah.
But to say and that individual, as well as the other committees that are or panels that are put in place to look at it, will have access to who knew what and when. So he has made that promise. I think that he has to be really clear about that point. This isn't about pushing things under the rug. This isn't about, hey, look the other way, here's a diversion tactic. This is about putting into place what is necessary to preserve and to reinstate the trust that Canadians have in the institution.
Right. Steph?
Well, yeah, except for one small thing. One thing that sort of went under the radar a bit today in Sam Cooper's reporting is, where did one of his leaks come from?
Yeah.
NSICOP, the secretive committee of parliamentarians who Trudeau says are the ones who ought to allegedly came from NSICOP.
Do we know? Yeah, it's an NSICOP report.
It's an NSICOP report.
So I don't know the province of who
we do not know where it came from.
It could be PCO, it could be PMO.
But the point was, this again, if the defense is, well, we have this committee of parliamentarians and they can absolutely look into this and they will be sworn to secrecy and it'll be fine. Well, clearly in the machination of government where there are people now unhappy and actively leaking, that includes people actively leaking that document. Yeah. And so it raises some questions here about the airtightness of all these reviews and investigations. And again, will they actually get to what the Prime Minister knew and when? Because isn't that part of the question? And guess who can answer that question?
Yeah.
The Prime Minister.
Well, Tim, just quickly, if your national security apparatus is going to leak like a straw diaper, shouldn't the Prime Minister find some way to start declassifying some of this information? If he can, there has to be a process for this. I know they're not like the President of the United States where you can simply deem something unclassified, but that seems something Michael Chong recommended last night as a path forward to offer an explanation to people in the face of what seems to be unrelenting questions.
Well, you could almost take, you carry the grocery hearings. You'd almost, the only thing I'd recommend about what Jagmeet Singh did, give him a pile of documents that are declassified. As he came into that committee hearing with a pile of documents, supposedly from Canadian.
Yeah.
Give them documents, let them look at them, kill them with paper, see where it goes.
But killing them, go, Amanda, quickly, final word there.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think it's like at this point, if there's nothing to hide, if you have, and you put all of these panels into place, I think what Canadians want to see is they want to see that like rubber stamp. Okay, everybody has looked at all of these top documents and definitively know where this government was, where they stood, where the Prime Minister was involved, where he wasn't involved. Yeah. And part of that might be like a big paper push at this point, and just to allow this information to funnel publicly the way that it should, instead of letting Poilievre dominate the headlines with these accusations that the Prime Minister can't be trusted.
Okay, I want to thank the Power Panel. And Zane, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, man. It's good to have you a little bit, well, not much earlier in the show because of the Grocery Committee hearings. But I appreciate all of you, Amanda Alvaro, Zane Velji, Tim Powers, and of course, Stephanie Levitz.